Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us for a live in-person version of the Landlord Lens. This is the collaboration between Property Tribes, of which I'm the co-founder and also a full-time residential landlord, and the NRLA, and I'm joined, of course, by Mr. Ben Beadle, who is CEO of the NRLA. And Ben and I usually do these over Zoom about once a quarter. And we like to talk about the key topics for landlords, the things that are happening right now in our sector that are encouraging landlords to go onto the social web and discuss it and talk and maybe find solutions if they're feeling some pain. And Ben, I think we're obviously having this chat at a very interesting time.
We say that every month, though,
well, we do, because there's so much going on in our sector. But when we were here at the October show, I told you that I was suffering from renters' reform bill fatigue. Now, I'm cured of that now. Now I'm suffering from renters' rights bill terror, and I think a lot of the landlord community are. So what I've done for today's broadcast, which we're recording for Property Tribes, which will go onto YouTube in the next day or two, I asked people on our forums to put forward their questions that they, because of this, there's so much uncertainty in our sector, as I'm sure you'll agree, and about this bill. And a lot of landlords are very fearful, but I think a lot of that is borne by the lack of detail.
Yes, that's right.
And you know, some of these questions, we may not know the answers. We'll say if we don't. Some of them are quite technical, but my first question is Section 8 mandatory grounds for repossession due to rent arrears going to be expanded on, as it looks like a green light for tenants to be in permanent arrears?
Yeah, I agree with that. So I think, no, I'm not expecting there to be very many amendments to this regulation at all. If we look at some of the stuff that's going on in our politics at the moment, we have a Tory party who have gone AWOL and are having a good look at themselves, and we have a really powerful government with a majority. So I wouldn't expect these things to change greatly. Obviously, there were people, when we've spoken previously, that were worried about the Conservatives' version of renters' reform. Well, that's dead in the water, and I'm afraid what we have now is something that I think we're going to not be able to change a great deal. And I share that concern, and that's one of the campaigning areas, Vanessa, actually, that we're working really hard on. We previously managed to get a 3 strikes and you're out ground. Mm-hmm. That's gone. What we have now is, rather than being 2 months in arrears, you have to be 3 months in arrears, and rather than 2 weeks notice, you need to have give 4 weeks notice. Now that, to me, that's basically 4 months rent arrears before you can even do anything. And I struggle to understand why we're legitimising rent dodging. Mm-hmm.
Well, let's call it what it is.
Well, indeed, there's no other thing to call it. That does not strike the balance for me. That is a green light to keep people in their homes as long as possible without paying. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that that's in the spirit of the regulation.
No, indeed. Now, the second question I've got is the appeals process for rent increases. Has it been considered that a large number of tenants may just challenge any rent increase, even if it's obviously fair, just on the off chance that it might be overturned, because they can do it without any risk to themselves? They'll be swamping the tribunal service. And this member thought that the current system, where the tribunal will set the rent amount to market rent, even though it may be higher than what the proposed rent amount was, seemed to be very fair to both sides. And that's going now, isn't it?
It is, and that was one of the concessions we negotiated previously, which was, if you go to have a case considered, then the judiciary, the independent judiciary, should be able to form a view about whatever they want to form a view about. Under this bill, you will either get what you ask for or less. Well, that doesn't seem particularly right to me, but there's a wider issue here, Vanessa, which is exactly what that person falls upon, which is the capacity of being able to deal with this stuff. Now, the minister is very clear, because he's told me, that he wants people to be challenging their rent. And I've no issue with people challenging unfair rent increases. You can do it at the moment. There's already an established process. But the thing is, that person is absolutely right that not only is it free to make an application, you will only, at worst, you will only get what the landlord is asking for. And even worse, that new rent, by the time it goes through the sausage factory of the tribunal, will only be awarded from the date of the hearing, not from the date of the expiry of the notice. And I say that is patently unfair. I mean...
No, it is.
It is. And the other thing is that we are forecasting that, I'll have to double check my statistic, but it's a ridiculous statistic, in as much as we're predicting a 4,000% increase in terms of uptake. The people that challenge their rent at the moment, I think it's about 1,000 or so cases a year, and we're expecting that to increase dramatically. Why wouldn't you? And I'm not so sure that is... I appreciate the Labour Party want to decisively level the playing field between landlord and renter. That's what they were elected upon, and that's exactly what they're going to do. But there are some things here that practically will not work, and this is one of them.
Well, why won't they listen to landlord stakeholders like yourselves on this matter? Because there's so much commentary in the media of concerns about it, landlords exiting because of these concerns. Are they paying any attention?
Yes, they are. I believe they are. But the Minister said in the session that we had a couple of weeks or so ago, if some highly leveraged landlords exit the sector, that wouldn't be a bad thing. And I say be careful what you wish for, because it's not as if we have loads of social housing to go round. We have over 1 million people on social housing waiting lists. And it feels to me that, particularly with the figures that were out yesterday on temporary accommodation, for example, it's difficult to see how that situation is going to improve if you alienate the very people that you need to provide homes. So it's really important to us that we continue to make those arguments, that we continue to work with other stakeholders about some of the difficulties that this is going to bring. Because the fact of the matter is, if the courts are over capacity, then they're probably not going to be able to deal, and the first tier tribunal, they're not going to be able to deal with tenant claims either. And if we have a big backlog of cases, whether it's for landlords or renters, actually the spirit of what the Minister intends to bring in through this bill is not going to serve anybody. So we need a degree of pragmatism. We have second reading on the 9th of October. I can tell you we've already been in touch with many Labour MPs, MPs of all colours, to put these arguments across. But we have to remember that actually we have a government who's on a mission, on a mission to deliver something that really feels like reform for renters. And I think that they will do that almost at any cost because they can. And that's the troubling thing.
It is. I fear there's going to be a lot of fallout from it. And, you know, it's actually going to impact tenants negatively as well.
Yes, it will. It will. And we mustn't kid ourselves that as businesses, and that's what we are as responsible landlords, you will take mitigating steps against some of these regulations. Now, I say, if you saw my presentation earlier, yes, there are a number of things in this bill that I think that landlords will be able to deal with. You've got to want to be able to deal with it versus other investments, but that's your own individual decision. But this isn't going to increase supply. This isn't going to bring rents down. It's not going to make things better for renters in the long run. And so you can say that, well, we've abolished no-fault evictions. Well, I don't evict my tenants without a reason. So, you know, I've got loads of reasons over here that I can do that. Yes, I accept that there's a small minority of landlords that perhaps misuse Section 21 or use it in the way it wasn't intended. But that's not going to stop landlords being able to sell their property, move back in, deal with serious rent arrears, or deal with antisocial behaviour. The fact is, it will just take a lot longer. And I suspect that you will price these things in to your rent setting should the market allow. And for as long as we have 21 people chasing each property, then some of this stuff will be like bidding wars. I mean, do me a favour. Unless you address the supply of homes, bidding wars, you can ban bidding wars, but how many people here actually encourage a bidding war? I don't, but I get offered 12 months rent up front. I get all sorts of offers. I don't want 12 months rent up front. I just want somebody to sustain the tenancy. And this isn't a landlord fault or a landlord problem. And I told the minister he won't be able to solve this problem. I understand the issue that he wants to try and solve, but you can't solve it this way by just banning stuff, because landlords will just ask for a higher rent.
The thing is, Ben, that there was suitable enforcement in place already to stop misuse of Section 21. For instance, if there was a retaliatory eviction, the tenant could have gone to the local authority and got help and support against that. They've not enforced the existing legislation, and now they're making it even harder. And it seems very much to me that it's about, as you said, it's getting voters and so on side, but it's the the minority that have caused this for the majority, to be honest. I think the pendulum has swung too far now.
Well, I mean, we have to see what happens as the bill makes its passage. And it's incumbent on everybody here to actually get involved in writing to your MP. How many folk here are an NRLA member? Yes, good. Anyone that's not, the doors are locked until you join. But I would encourage you to write to your MP. We've got a toolkit on our website. We're not going to write the letter for you, because actually it's much better that we give you a few pointers rather than do a copy and paste thing that everybody chucks across. But there will be different issues for different people, and you can't take this sort of stuff lying down. Write to your local MP, get them to write to the Secretary of State with your concerns. I think what I would say is it all has to be put in a sector perspective. This party are not interested in supporting landlords, they're interested in supporting renters. Our argument is that actually, by hurting the very people that are providing homes, in the long run, you will hurt the very people you're purporting to protect. So we can't be too partisan about this. We've got to look at this as a sector as a whole, but we've got to get out there and we've got to write to our MPs and elected representatives and point out some of these issues, and we can really help you with that.
The position for leasehold flats where the tenant breaches covenants in the lease could not be considered ASB, but could result in the landlord being issued with a Section 146 notice because the lease has been breached. So it could be anything from subletting on Airbnb, commercial vehicles in the car park, etc., using premises for business use, pets causing a nuisance to other residents. So what is the position there? Because
there is a ground. It's a bit of a catch-all. But there is a ground for breach of tenancy, a discretionary ground for breach of tenancy. So it's not as though that landlords will be unable to deal with this. You will be able to deal with it. You will need to have your wits about you, keep your audit trails. And I was saying earlier, Vanessa, that this is just not the time to go by the seat of your pants. You've got to make sure that you've got robust systems in place. Now, for those of you that are NRLA members, you've got access to Safe2, you've got access to Portfolio that will keep, your records documented and audited, and your reminder dates and all of that sort of stuff. And I'd really, really encourage people to use it, because gone are the days where you're managing stuff from a spreadsheet. To be honest with you, I think we've got to be far better than that.
Well, there are so many good digital tools out there that landlords can use that there's no excuse not to, really.
I agree, and I think that when we get a challenge, such as this, you've got a couple of options. You're investors. you will take a view about whether that investment is a going concern. No one's forcing us to be a landlord. Nobody particularly loves us for being a landlord, but it's down to you as what your I guess contingency is for that investment. Now, for me, I'm not too worried about a property portal or abolition of Section 21, providing the alternative works, and a number of landlords fall into that bracket. But as a package of things against things like Section 24, EPC changes, and so forth, you're just going to have to weigh up. And we know that a third of members that we surveyed said that they were going to downsize or offload some. It doesn't mean they're running for the exit. It just means they're taking a really strategic view about their businesses. And I'd encourage you guys to do the same. There'll still be rewards here, but if you've been in the business like me for 20 years, it's not going to be as good as it was 20 years ago. And that's just something we have to come to terms with.
Yeah, we have to adapt, don't we?
We do.
And education for landlords is going to be at the forefront of that.
100%. And you mentioned about sort of technology tools to help you. There are so many things that are out there if you are wanting support on your landlord journey. And I would say absolutely embrace them. You've got to make life as easy as possible, and particularly when it comes to, say, tenant referencing, for example. So, we've got anti-discrimination clauses, quite rightly. I don't want to discriminate against anybody. But you've also got the ban on advance rent. So how many people collect advance rent? So ironically, I probably shouldn't say this, but I had a message this week from one of my tenants, who's a student tenant, who said, I just got my student loan. I'd love to be able to just pay the next 3 months so that it's done. Yeah, fine, by all means. But you won't be able to do that in the new world. And so if you can't de-risk with guarantors and advance rent, what are you going to do? You'll take one of the other 20 people that have applied. And so this is why I think there has to be a really careful balance between giving renters the security they deserve, but also giving landlords the certainty to operate in the sector. A failure to do the latter will not help the former.
Well, I can't agree more. And, an example is that this clause against advanced rent,
yes,
it's going to exclude certain people from our sector.
It will.
Now, an elderly person that has no income, maybe they have some savings, but they can't prove affordability on a monthly basis.
You have to be careful that doesn't result in discrimination.
Well, this is the thing. I have a family member who is mentally corrupted and is under power of attorney. She has savings from an insurance payout. She will not be able to access private renting because she doesn't have a monthly income.
Yeah.
So people in these obviously niche circumstances, they may struggle Well, they will struggle then.
They will. Absolutely
to access private sector renting.
Or any form of housing.
But who is putting this forward and saying there's always exceptions?
Well, I guess the difficulty is here that actually this becomes almost slightly ideological in terms of the direction of travel from a policy perspective. This is all about delivering on manifesto pledges to renters. We're going to hold bad landlords to book. We're going to ban bidding wars. We're going to ban rent in advance and punishing prerequisites to renting a property. And, the difficulty is that I guess common sense or logic is not playing enough of a part.
It's not.
Unfortunately. And so, I've got tenants that were relocated from Hong Kong.
Yeah, another good example.
So, and they paid me a year's rent up front. Not because I'd asked for it, but they said, we can't prove our income. We really need to move. This is a couple of years ago when there was political uncertainty. We need a family house. We're going to be looking at buying somewhere. We've got 12 months rent up front. Would that work for you? Yes, of course it was. It wasn't me going out saying, I want 12 months rent up front. I don't want 12 months rent up front. I just want to know that the people are going to look after the place and sustain the tenancy. And so we continue to make this argument, but you have a number of renters groups that almost don't give a stuff about that practical end of the market. If I can't de-risk I won't rent to you. Simple as that. And I suspect that there will be a lot of people in that position. And so I say that actually the concept of advance rent and guarantors is, perfectly legit. It's not, it's not an unreasonable demand. And if I can't make that demand, Vanessa, I will wait for somebody else.
And we have so much choice.
Indeed, absolutely. I was told, where was it? A particular part of the country that had, we quote the 21 people chasing a home as an average, but there was a part of the world, I forget where now, but there was 54 people chasing a home. And so you will always be able to find somebody. And that's why, I commend the government for banning discriminatory practice, but until you sort out the supply crisis, you're not going to be able to have that desired effect, because all you're looking for is the best possible tenant with the best possible credentials to make sure that they can sustain the tenancy for 12, 18, whatever period of time it happens to be. And so if you do get an applicant from somebody with, I don't know, loads of dogs or on benefits or not able to afford, what are you going to do? You're going to take somebody that can, and you're going to reject them. And you know what? You will be perfectly within your rights to do that, as long as that is a fair process. And it will be a fair process, because you would just dial back to credit referencing, salary, and other types of referencing. That's why your referencing will need to be absolutely white hot.
It will. I think there is going to have to be, if you're not robustly referencing tenants at the moment, you're definitely going to have to do that. I'm interested on your views actually on rent guarantee insurance, because I think this is a product that's going to come into its own. It's going to go through the roof, and you'd be mad not to have it. I mean, I've always had it anyway.
Have you? Okay.
Just belts and braces, but I can see it's going to become an extremely mainstream product. Obviously, the insurance companies are going to have to think of the risk to them because they had an easy route via Section 21, which will have gone, so they'll have to go through they'll have to fund the Section 8 process. So rent guarantee insurance is probably going to go up, but then if tens of thousands of millions of landlords take it out, then it'll probably just settle back down again. But it's going to be a very vital product going forward.
And we will need to make sure that as an association that we're able to leverage our size to get our members the best possible deals when it comes to that. But there will be lots of knock-on impacts like that. And I think the thing here is that, in one way, it's very good that the government have brought forward their bill so quickly, because at least you know what you're going to be dealing with. But you've got to be agile enough to be able to change, adapt, embrace the technologies that are out there, and the way that you did things before will not be the way that you do things going forwards.
Well, I have to say that the people in this room today, they are the minority. I've heard that only 5% of landlords have heard of the Renters' Rights Bill in a recent survey. And if you think there's 2.7 million landlords in the UK, that's a total of 135,000 that have heard of it. Ben, you've got 110,000 members, something like that. So the level of awareness is very low, and those landlords that aren't aware of it, I fear for them. They're really going to struggle.
But the thing is, the fines are much more punitive.
They are.
I mean, they're horrible.
They're nasty.
That's not something we're going to campaign against, because I can't be in the position of supporting bad landlords.
Quite.
But I feel for those that are
uninformed.
That are uninformed, and really, there can be no excuse now. Your investment will be almost worthless if you end up getting, a £30,000-40,000 fine. And yet I still got people quibbling about paying 99 quid
I know.
to join the NRLA.
I know.
And what I would say is, I've had a few people on the stand say, I'm using a letting agent. Well, they're going to take care of everything for me. Well, are they? Because it's the same with rent to rent. Honestly, that's going to be a business model that's knocked out the water.
Well, that's one good thing in some ways.
In a way, but if you're an unwitting landlord without, you just think, and maybe there's even a few here today, that take a rent-to-rent provider at their word because of their wonderful guarantee. Oh my goodness, you're going to be up a well-known creek without a paddle, and I really worry for you. For me, whether I use a letting agent or not, I want to be one step ahead of them. I want to know that they are, referencing my tenants in the right way. And you know what? If they can't, I'll do it myself. And actually, that's what I look after all of my places myself. Whether that's, I can't do repairs, but I can change light bulbs and hang curtains. That's about the level I can do. But making sure that my license is renewed, making sure that repairs are dealt with promptly, making sure that that rents are followed up, and that's why we've invested so much in things like Safe 2 and Portfolio, because as a typical NRLA member, 8 properties, that I need to be able to get rid of my spreadsheet. I need to, professionalise what I'm doing. And the thought of getting I'd lose my job if I got a £30,000 fine, I'm sure, but, it would wipe out my profits massively.
Yep.
And so going by the seat of your pants or relying on an agent who you think's good and it turns out to be crap, honestly, stop. I mean, by all means, use an agent. There's some great agents out there, but keep informed, keep in touch with property tribes, become a member of the NRLA, use our resources, because although we're going to be campaigning heavily in terms of the changes that we want to see, ultimately these changes will come in some way, shape or form. The next thing that people need is how are we going to implement this stuff? Is it retrospective? Yes, it is. What does that mean for my 12-year-old tenancy that's ongoing? Well, it's going to turn periodic. I'm going to need to serve new documentation potentially. You need to make sure that not only are we fighting your corner as much as we can, but that we're going to provide you with all of the tools to make sure that you comply. And we absolutely are, but it's going to be hard work.
It is. And also for lettings agents as well. They need to start planning now.
Well, they do.
They're going to have to retrain staff, redo documents, redo protocols, redo processes. I mean, it
will be painful. And I think, so we're expecting royal assent in the spring, but there will be a short lead-in time to allow the industry to get ready. Now, we say that should be a year. But not so much for landlords like this, but for big agents. People like, I think Leaders Romans are here today, friends of ours. But if they've got hundreds of thousands of tenancies, well, there's going to be a lot that they're going to have to do. And what the minister was at pains to say is that he did want to give the sector time to be able to adjust so that they didn't make mistakes. But time to adjust is not a few weeks. It's, at least 6 months. I'm pushing for a year, and I may be winging in the wind. But this is not about avoiding the regulations. This is about saying, okay, you want to do this, you want to change it. This is the best way that you can get landlords on board. But, folks, we need time. Otherwise, renters aren't going to feel the benefit of these changes.
Has the government given you any indication about the education of landlords about all these new regulations? Are they going to be running any campaigns or?
Well, to be fair, civil servants have been very helpful. So we've run an initial webinar where we had thousands join. In fact, I
think that was your biggest ever webinar.
Yeah, it was huge.
Yeah.
We normally have a limit of 1,000 on webinars, and we had to up it because there was so much interest. And in fairness, we had some great government officials that were talking through the rationale. It's not a lobbying kind of webinar. This is, as much as we may dislike some of these things, we also want to make sure that landlords know what's going on, and they know that the association is fit as a butcher's dog to make sure that when these things come in, that we're going to have the right documents, notices, advice, and all of that stuff, and we will. So they have been very helpful, but I suspect it will fall a lot to the sector to be educating their landlords.
Indeed, and property tribes, we want to play a big part in that. We've done the most fantastic interview with David Smith.
Oh, yes.
And we also filmed his presentation at the Letting Industry Council was it last week, Nick?
Last Friday.
A couple of weeks ago. And it was very informative. And I would urge everybody to have a look at that because it's incredibly interesting and goes into some considerable detail.